Today we'll be going over how to review a DotLoop for a contract for compliance, and then also how to organize the DotLoop so that it looks nice and is easy for everybody to find anything that they need. So to get started, usually what triggers anyone on the success team to know that something needs to happen in DotLoop is we'll get one of these forms. So in this particular instance, we're going to be looking at an under contract listing. You can see here that I got an under contract listing form. So when I get one of those, I'm going to go in, I'm going to click on view summary, and that's going to pull this up in the result, or like the form responses from Google. In this particular case, I already have the form open. And actually, just so that you can see, typically when you open it, it's going to open up to this summary page, and you'll want to go to individual. We do have a couple of older ones that we've already actually handled and need to delete. So today, the one we're going to be looking at is 19 South Dewberry. So the first thing we do when we get this form is we actually print it. So you go to this individual tab here, and then you're going to print the form, and we're going to print it to a PDF. This is how I do it. This is how I print to a PDF on my computer. It might be different if you're using a different type of computer or a different web browser. So just however you print to a PDF, and we name it. So this is actually, it should be, I need to fix that. Should be TZG under contract listing, and it's going to be 19 South Dewberry is the address. So we do just that. We name what it is, and then the street address for the property is how we name things. So we're going to hit save here. Now we have that as a PDF. We can take a quick look at it here so we can see that they're reporting. So Mark is the agent who put this under contract. The property address is 19 South Dewberry. He's telling us that showings are going to continue. We don't know anything additional about EMD, and there are no inspections on this particular property. He let us know who the title company was, and then what the commission split will be is 50-50, and actually in this one I actually think it's outside co-broke 50-50, but either way, 50-50. And then this is just something more, it's on there as a reminder for the agents that they need to be starting a group text conversation with Rachel. So you can kind of take a look at it real quick to see the information on there, and then we jump into DotLoop. So over here, I've got DotLoop open, and we're gonna, this one happens to be right at the top. If it's not right at the top, you can just do a search for the property. It's right here. And now we have the folder open. And a lot of times when a listing goes under contract, it's gonna look like this. And we can see we can see that this is the under contract folder, or you can't, but we will see that. So this is the under contract folder. And we need to make this all pretty and nice and get this loop ready and checked for compliance. So what we're going to do first is we're going to add that Google form that we downloaded. So you hit browse or add document, browse, and then wherever you saved that form on your computer, you upload it into DotLoop. And now the next thing that I do is open up the folder, or I'm sorry, not open up the folder, but open up all of the documents in the folder. So if you select them all by clicking the little checkbox next to the folder, then you can just hit open. And then we'll have everything in front of us. Personally, this is how I like to organize the file, just because it makes it, in my opinion, a little bit easier to name things. But I can show you there's a couple different ways to do it. So this document is already named correctly. When you have multiple files open and you're scrolling through, the name up here will change as you get to a new document. So we can see here, this is the form that we printed and just added. And now we get here, this is the pre-approval letter, the pre-qualification letter. You can see that right here. So you can see it, a lot of times things come over to us and they get named in all sorts of different ways. And we like to try and keep things named similarly so it's really easy to find them in the future when we need them. So a pre-qualification or a pre-approval letter, we usually name PQ for pre-qualification, and then you put just the street address. The reason you add the street address at the end is because sometimes for whatever reason, we're downloading multiple files onto our computer for one reason or another, and it just makes it a lot easier to keep, rather than just say pre-qualification, and then if you happen to download multiple pre-qualifications from different files, now you can't keep track of what's what. So we like to add what it is, and then also, or something that tells us what it is, and then also what property is it for. You can hear my dog whining in the background. Sorry about that. We've got the pre-qualification letter, so now we're going to keep scrolling down, and maybe it will load, or maybe it will stay a blank white page, or maybe it is a blank white page. Oh, okay. We'll keep going. Here we go. So this file, you can see the file name changed here, 19 South Dewberry Disclosures. We're actually going to make this one pretty in a slightly different way, but to do it, we have to have just this file open. So we're going to scroll past this. Keep going. Okay, now here we go. 19 South Dewberry PNS. So this one, when we have a fully executed purchase and sale agreement, we name it Executed PSA, and then again, put the street address after it so that it's easy to find it. So now those things are all at least looking pretty and named appropriately. We're going to go back, and then we're going to go back into this disclosure file. So the reason we want to have this one open individually is you can see that if you're scrolling through, there's actually multiple parts of it on here. You can see the property disclosure, and then when you scroll to the end, you can see there's also a property disclosure rider, and we want those as separate files. So here, when you have one file open, you can go to File right here and then Split Document. And this particular document, we're going to split into 3. We want to split it into however many parts there are. This first page we actually don't need. So when I'm doing this, anything I don't need, I just name Archive. And that's just the first page. And then if you scroll, you can see the second page. The second page through the 6th page is the property disclosure. So you can change the page numbers over here. 19 South Dewberry Lane. And then this last page, page 7, is the property disclosure rider, and we call that PDR 19 South Dewberry Lane. So now we've named each individual file, we've specified what the page numbers for that file are, and then we hit Split Document here. Oh, I've never seen that before, of course. So now we're going to hit Try Again. There we go. All right, so you get this message that 3 documents were created. You hit Done. And now you can see right here at the top, we've got 3 different files, and they're all named different things. What happens with that original file, DotLoop automatically archives it, so it's not here in the folder anymore. If you ever need to find it, I have more than one time made a mistake when I was splitting a document. You can go to Show Archived here, and this grayed out file, that's the old one that we just archived. I'm going to hide it again. DotLoop doesn't allow you to delete anything. So if something disappears on you, just know that it's archived somewhere. And this file that we named archive, we don't need that anymore, so we're going to archive it. The other thing that we're going to change here is the folder name. So to do that, we need to look at the purchase and sale. We like to have the folders named with both the buyer's name and also the agent name. So the buyer's name is Claudia, or in listings at least. So for a listing, we like the buyer's name and the agent name, and that's because sometimes when we get multiple offers and we'll have multiple folders, it just helps us kind of keep the different offers straight. So here we've got Claudia Wilcox, so we're going to go back, and the name of this folder, we're going to rename it. So you click on this little 3 dots and you hit rename, and it's going to be UC for under contract. And then we do the buyer's last name, so that's Wilcox. And then we put agent is Artis Bossy. So that's how we always name the buyer folder, or the folder for the under contract buyer in a listing. So now you can see we've got these all named appropriately. And now the last part is to just organize it as far as what order they should go in. So we like to order it by kind of what's the most important and what are we going to access the most frequently, down to stuff that we might not access as frequently. The purchase and sale we're looking at consistently throughout the transaction, so we put that right at the top. And then the property disclosure that is required for compliance, it's very important. Property disclosure rider, I put right under that. I usually put the pre-qualification, and then our under contract listing form, since that's just an internal document that nobody else needs to see, I leave that at the bottom. So this is kind of a general order. There are a lot of other documents that may or may not be included depending on the property, and you can kind of see the DotLoop naming conventions Google Doc, and that has definitely more detail. Obviously in this situation, we can only work with the forms that we have. So that's how this one is going to be set up. We do also at this point want to make sure that we change the listing, or the loop rather, to under contract. Put the under contract price, which you can find right on the purchase and sale. You can see $75,000, and we're also going to need the closing date, which is right here, the transfer of title. So that's going to be March 25th. So we go back here, and we can do, this price is already in here as $75,000 from a previous time that this was under contract and before it fell apart. And then this closing date we just need to update. So we're going to go here, and it was March 25th, and now this loop is all updated. So that's how we set up a loop, and then the next part that we want to do is check this loop for compliance. In theory, the listing piece should already be in compliance because we've had the listing for a while, and that should have already been checked. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to review checking the under contract documents for compliance. So once again, we're going to check all the documents off. You can actually uncheck something like a pre-qualification or an under contract listing just because there's nothing compliance wise that you need to look at for those. There's no initials, no signatures. Some other things that you might not need to include when you're checking for compliance is going to be things like tax maps. We need to have a deed and we need to have a tax map, but as long as we have the document, you don't need to check it for signatures or initials. The compliance piece is just simply having them. If we have condo docs for a condo, again, we need to have the documents, but they don't need to be initialed or signed, so there's not really anything to check for compliance. The big documents you're going to be looking at is anything that the client needed to sign or initial. So that's going to be things like the purchase and sale, property disclosure, property disclosure riders, lead paint disclosures, and addendums. Those are going to be the big ones that you see time and time again. So we've got those checked off. We're going to hit open. And now the big stuff that we're checking for compliance is going to be, well, I'll go over the basic stuff first, and then I'll go over into some more detailed stuff. So for compliance purposes, the first thing we look at is you want to make sure that there's initials at the bottom of every page. So you can see right here, there's the spots for it. And we have one seller and one buyer. So we need to check, we have one seller initial and one buyer's initial. So we've got that on page 1. We've got that on page 2. This spot right here will almost always be initialed by the buyer as well. Technically it's still compliant even if it's not initialed, but I'd always just kind of take a look. Right here, this is going to be initialed right here because the buyer checked no for all of their inspections. So if everything says no, this does need to be initialed. So we can see that that did happen. We've got initials here at the bottom of this page. There's 2 sets of initials at the bottom of page 4. You're going to have initials in this wire fraud section, and then right below it, you're going to have this other set, which is actually initialing at the bottom of the page. They just happen to be right next to each other. So both of those spots do need to be initialed on page 4. And then on the last page, page 5, you're going to have a signature. There's no initials on page 5, but there does need to be a signature for the buyer and also for the seller on page 5. That is the absolute most basic piece of a contract to be compliant. And we can see that that aspect of this is all compliant, so that part is good. And actually, we'll go through, because the same thing, you're looking for the same thing on the property disclosure and the property disclosure rider. So you can see on the property disclosure, again, the buyer and the seller both need to initial, which is that has happened here, page 2, page 3, page 4, and then they both need to sign on page 5, which has also happened. And they've added this fun little initial at the bottom of page 5, even though they've signed on that page. Why did they do that? I do not know, but you have to make sure that that's all completed. And then finally, on the property disclosure rider, you're just making sure that both parties have signed. The buyer and the seller have both signed, so that has happened here. So checking for initials and signatures is one of the most basic pieces of compliance, and we can see that that's happened here. So now we'll go into some more detailed, and we'll actually look at the documents one at a time for this part. So I'm going to go back. We're going to open up the purchase and sale. So I can tell you right now, we're actually going to pop back something that I noticed. We're going to pop back to the other screen, but I wanted to point it out before I did it. So we can see right up here at the top of every purchase and sale, there needs to be an effective date. And if it's not already in there, we can fill it out. If you're ever unsure of what the effective date is, absolutely feel free to ask the agent or ask Rachel, Michelle, one of the success team members. But there does need to be an effective date. The reason that we're going to have to pop back out is because whenever you see a document that has a green signature or a green initial on it somewhere, it means that is a live DotLoop signature. And if you make any changes, such as including or adding a date to a contract, it's going to erase those initials and those signatures. So just so that you can see what's going to happen, if I were to go here, hit add date, and I click on that, you're going to get this form. If you ever get this pop-up, you want to close it, or you want to say do not make changes. If you click yes, I'm sure, it's going to erase signatures, and that's bad. So here we're going to hit the little X, because no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to erase signatures. And there's a workaround for this. So now we're going to hit back. This is where we go back into the loop. And in order to add something like an effective date to a contract that has been signed, what we need to do is we need to make a copy. So if you click on this 3 little dots here, you're going to click on make a copy and select copy as a flat PDF. This means signatures are preserved, so when you do add that date, it won't delete anything. If you copy it as a .loop document, it's going to keep those as live signatures, and they'll disappear if you make any changes. So you're going to hit copy as a flat PDF to loop, and now you just have to search and find this loop. So in this case, it looks like we have 2, so let's see if I guess correctly. I'm looking at this one, here we go. And we can see that, so once you've clicked on it, it'll show you the folders, and it'll basically select the folder you want to put it into. And this is the folder we're working on. Under contract Wilcox, hit copy, hit OK. And now you can see that you've got this in here twice. This bold one means it's never been opened, and that's how we know that's the new one we just created. So this old one that has the live signatures on it, we're going to go ahead and archive that because we don't need it twice. And now we can open up executed PSA, and you can see that this has turned into a flat black signature just like the other one. This means it's not going to disappear if you make any changes to the contract now. So now we can go up to the top, add date, and now we're going to have to select a date. The effective date of the contract is always the last date at which a signature or initial was received on the contract, and then it was sent back to all parties. The sent back to all parties is why you might sometimes need to ask someone what the effective date actually is. If someone signed something really late, it's possible that it didn't go back to the other agent until the next day, for instance, in which case, so like right here, George signed this at 9:34 p.m. So it's possible that it didn't go back to the other agent until the next day, which would make the next day the effective date. In this case, you would have to ask, and actually I'm going to have to check to see if we can figure out when that was sent. So I can also show you how to do that. Hold on one second. We're going to go back to that file, that purchase and sale that we archived. And also never, ever, ever feel bad or hesitate to ask this. The effective date is really important because it's where all of the deadlines count from. So it is important to get it right. And like in this particular case, of course, we picked a challenging one the very first time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at the old purchase and sale. I'm going to click on history, and I am going to see if I can tell when it was shared. Okay, so right here, so if you look at the history, you can see all the changes, and you can also see when people viewed the document. When it was viewed isn't the important part, it's when it was sent back. Once it was sent back, the other agent is considered to have received it, and that becomes the effective date. So here you can see George signed at 9:34. I personally know that Mark goes to bed really early, so I was pretty sure he probably didn't send it back to the agent last night. And we can see here, Mark shared it with Artis Bossy, the other agent, on February 25th at 6:30 a.m. So now we know February 25th is the effective date. So I'm going to go back here, and it's going to open very slowly. And we can mark February 25th as the effective date. And now we just hit save. So now this is an effective date, which is a compliance piece again. So the other things that we want to check on are, I always check the seller against the deed. I can show you how to do that real quick. I do know offhand that this is correct because Affordable Mobiles is a repeat client of ours. It's George Basham. But if it was someone you were not familiar with, you're going to click on the purchase and sale, and I open it up along with the deed. In a listing, the deed itself is going to be in the listing docs. So we're going to open both of those up together. We can see that the seller says Affordable Mobiles, and then we're going to scroll down and we can see, so here's the deed, and you can see grants to Affordable Mobiles LLC. So that's how we know that that is the correct seller, and that is the owner. So we can go back in here. The seller's correct. Unfortunately, there's really not a way to verify the buyer's name, so that's not something that we check during compliance. At some point in the transaction, it's possible that we can find out that there's an error on the buyer's name, in which case we'd do an addendum, but it's not really something we can check up front. We do also check I should have kept the deed open. We do also check the address to make sure the address is correct. Believe it or not, the address comes over on the purchase and sale wrong more often than you would think. So even though that's a very basic part of the contract. So 19 South Dewberry, that is correct. In Rochester, here's the town. And then book and page, that's why I should have left that open. So we're actually going to go back. We're going to open up the contract and the deed. And we can see, so this is referencing book 4956 and page 716. So now we're going to scroll down to the deed, and we can see that it's book 4956, page 716. So that is correct. I'll just leave that open for now. In this section, what we're looking at is, so this written amount should match the numerical amount here. And then if you take the numerical amount for the purchase price and subtract any deposits that are listed, so right here we have just a $1,000 deposit. Sometimes there's a second deposit here. But taking this number minus this and this, if it's there, should equal this number here. So we double check that to make sure it's correct. Let's see, what else would we check? Under representation, another thing that we see sometimes, we want to make sure that the agents' names are correct, particularly the agents on our team. We're not necessarily checking that the other agent wrote their name correctly, but sometimes what we see, for instance, I've seen Mark's name spelled incorrectly, so you want to make sure the spelling is correct, which is right here. This is right. Sometimes it'll come through and it'll say the Zoller Group, and that is something that needs to be corrected. So if you see in the representation section that it says the Zoller Group, that needs to be corrected. You want to make sure that the correct person is marked as the seller agent and the buyer's agent. So in this case, that is correct. Mark is the seller agent and Artis is the buyer agent. And you know that, like, if it's our listing, then we'll be the seller agent, and then the other person will always be the buyer agent. Technically the other person could be facilitator. If the other person is marked as facilitator, just leave that as is. That has to do with their relationship, and we just assume that that is correct. If both parties are a member of or are part of Keller Williams Coastal Realty, this notice of designated agency does have to be checked. So that's another thing that you're looking at. That's the big stuff that you're going to be looking for on the first page. So then we'll go to the second page. If the property was built prior to 1978, you do want to make sure that the correct box here, yes or no, is checked. So prior to 1978 will be a yes. After 1978 will be a no. There are two places you can look at that. You can either pull up the MLS sheet, which is again in the loop. So we'll go back and do that. And you can also pull up the property card. That should also tell you. So PC for property card, active MLS sheet right there. We'll open those. Property cards all look different. So you just kind of have to get used to looking for information. All towns have a different looking one. So right here we can see year built 1978. And then you can see on the MLS sheet, right here, year built 1978. So when something is built in 1978, we're opening it slowly. When something is built in 1978, this will be no. It is only if it's before 1978, so 1977 or earlier, that you would have to check yes here. Inspections, you're not as much checking for compliance. Just again, if all of these say no, the buyer needs to initial right here, which is the case here. Not too much to check for compliance here. Not too much to check for compliance here. Not a whole lot on this page. This is really, again, just the initials. And then again, not too much on this page, as long as those signatures are there. So really, a lot of the extra detail stuff that you're looking for is going to be on that first page. And if you ever have any questions about that, or if something just doesn't look right, again, never hesitate to ask. As far as checking the property disclosure, again, on a listing, this should already be all set. The disclosure should be compliant before we go live. So whatever the buyer signs should be compliant, but it's not a bad idea to just look at it real quick. In the state of New Hampshire, there are 3 things that are absolute required disclosures. So we have to make sure that those are complete. The seller has to disclose the information about the water supply. So here we can see that it's public, and he answered the questions that are relevant to a public water supply. They have to answer the questions about sewage disposal systems. Here it's private, and you can see that they answered the questions that are relevant to a private system. And then the only other thing that is absolutely required in New Hampshire is information about the insulation. So they have to have some sort of answers in this section. Those things are checked. Everything else is great, and it's ideal to have that, but technically it's not out of compliance if everything else on here is blank. It's just a crappy disclosure. But yeah, so this one we already checked for initials and signatures, and those 3 key pieces of information are filled out, so this is a compliant disclosure. And actually, now that I think about it, my bad, I missed one thing. The heating system information is also required in the state of New Hampshire. So right here on page 3, heating system, there has to be at least some information filled out here. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100% filled out, but there has to be some information here. So this disclosure is compliant. So now we can go back. On the property disclosure rider, this top part does need to be filled out. And again, by the time we're going under contract, this should all be complete. Really, for the most part, this whole disclosure should be relatively complete. Sometimes we'll have some missing information, and in those cases, just ask to make sure it's okay. But this is all really important information, and it should be pretty complete. So as long as it's pretty complete and both sides have signed it, this is compliant and can be uploaded to command. And for this particular file, those are all of the documents that we needed to check for compliance. We do always check this up front, and then usually before I upload things to command, I just take a quick look at what it is I'm uploading and make sure it's compliant one last time before I actually upload it. Just because things change, we'll add documents throughout the transaction, and quite frankly, if I checked it a couple weeks ago, I want to make sure I didn't like happen to miss something that day. So I always double check before I upload things to command. But again, this particular file is in good shape right now. And that's everything.